sky blue. Well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Money is something we all deal with, but how many of us truly understand it? What if you could make better decisions with your money? Decisions that secure your future, protect your family, and bring you peace of mind. I'm Darren Jacobs, and I'm here to help you make sense of your dollars. Welcome to Dollars and Cents, the show that breaks down the financial world in ways that matter to you. No jargon, no confusion, just real conversations about money, your money. So join me every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on WESN for Dollars and Cents.
If you've gotten to the point where you have the aches and pains and they're on a daily basis, they're not transient anymore, then it's probably gone already a little bit too far, right? So what a patient has to understand, what your audience has to understand is the fact that you need to pay attention to self now, in that perimenopausal age range.
We're talking about 40s.
Right? In your 40s.
From the time you hit 40,
in your 40s, you know it's coming. You can't escape it, right?
Start to change the way you take care of yourself.
Yes, exactly. And you have to know what options are available to you.
WESN.
Good morning, this is talking about the WSN Connect Capital Show. Michael Small here once again. I know that we're in the middle of what is for many a long weekend, despite the fact that it technically is not a long weekend. However, the world still technically moves on, even if you're taking extra unofficial vacation. So for those who are still listening, and of course, we do know that we get a lot of people who watch either our reruns or watch us on our social media after the live broadcast. There's a lot to get through to close out this week. One of the things I just want to mention briefly, and I expect to be disagreed with shortly, at least in some capacity, but I find it very interesting. I tend to not necessarily pay attention to everything that happens when we're on any sort of vacation period, because you need to unwind and de-stress, right? One of the things that I did take note of was the fact that the PNM held a candlelight vigil, which is an interesting act for them to do, given the fact that the previous iterations of any sorts of candlelight vigil was a movement that technically was protest how they themselves was handling crime at the time. This would have been 2021, I believe, so we were still technically within the realms of the global pandemic. But one of the interesting points is to consider the fact that here comes an unpopular, or at least seemingly unpopular, opposition leader, unpopular even within, to some extent, the ranks of the membership or PNM supporters, with, of course, an opposition party, which probably is at one of its lowest points that it has ever been, all things considered, basically now taking the reins of a protest action, redirecting it to some extent from crime, to some extent, and angling it towards the wider issue of democratic freedoms, including the right to protest. It makes me wonder, without necessarily going deep into the stories, my initial reaction is very simple. Has the government now provided the opposition with a tangible issue by which it could rally support around and accelerate its rehabilitated image without necessarily doing the work that's needed to actually lay the foundation for a true long-term rehabilitated image? And if that is true, which It's hard to say if it is right now. What is that going to mean for the next election? Oh boy. I think we're going to end up with one of those situations where people like Mr. San Fernando are going to say, I have no one to vote for, so I'm not going to vote for anybody. Once, fine. Is that a solution if we do it twice? Now, joining me to kick off the morning here, of course, we have, as usual on Fridays, former actor ESP, now soon to be retired inspector, counting down the days. I think we have what, maybe half a year left? Ashraf Ali. Half a year left, Ashraf Ali, yeah.
Morning, Sean, morning.
Morning.
A very interesting opening, I might add.
And one of the things is, you weren't able to join me last week, so there's technically a week's worth of developments within just the national security space.
You see, now, my perspective with respect to anybody utilizing the concept of a candlelight vigil is what was the intention, what a candlelight vigil intended to bring forth. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things that you can have a candlelight vigil for, because it's an opportunity for persons to come out, join together for a common cause or some issue. So it can be a protest, it could be in support of, or it can be in oppose of, it could be in opposing some sort of activity, right? If we take that, a candlelight vigil, and believe that it can be the foundation for a greater movement, then we have some problems, because why? The Andrea Barrett situation didn't really go far, right?
Well, one of the great what-ifs for me is, what would have happened if you didn't have, because they were gearing up for increased protests during the Easter period at that time. I can't remember if it's 2021 or 2022, forgive me. I assume it's 21. And Gary Griffith had to basically say, look, you can't protest right now, because I think there were fears in anticipation of a surge with the Easter vacation.
And this is where I am saying, this is what I'm directing.
So just to finish, I don't know if that prematurely kind of artificially stopped that movement, or if it did die because it ran out of steam within the public.
Well, it can, because when you look at what was the situation with the unfortunate situation with the Andrea Barrett and the other young ladies, where violence was, the level of violence, there was an uproar, a lot of persons came forward, both political entities, NGOs, and community groups came together and were voicing their opinion in a manner in which violent crimes were being dealt with, and the number of violent crimes against females and the government inability to treat with it. Whether it was a fair assumption or not, that is not for me. I'm not making that assumption at the point in time, right? But the reality is the government was held responsible and the police was held responsible because of the violent crimes. In this circumstance, I can understand the opposition is saying that there is some issues with the level of violent crime, right? There's some issues of violent crime, but within a state of emergency, right? Because state of emergency is supposed to have alleviated some of the, or should have reduced some of these issues. What came out of what is really the trigger was the issue with the shooting, the shooting incident, the police-involved shooting, and the charges that was subsequently laid against Kyla Seeley. Well, no, that was the foundation in which the protests came out of. Yes. The other foundation was the other groups joining in terms of saying that they want peace march and all of those other things, and then the opposition say, hey, the manner in which this administration is dealing with certain things, they had a visual with respect to that also. And there are other issues where they wanted to bring forth. Fair enough. But the biggest picture, the biggest question is that we keep asking for democracy. We keep saying that our judicial system is poor. We keep saying that law enforcement is not doing what it's supposed to do. We keep saying that the governments of the day are not taking the appropriate action and not safeguarding our citizens. All of that is relevant. Here's one of the biggest questions that nobody's keep on asking this is that protest action against what? The initial protest action with this 19 bullets, 19 protests was for what? Was it for the police-involved shooting? or was it for the charges that was laid against the young lady? My thing about it is this: if you want justice, if you want democracy, if you want freedom of speech, why are we not allowing this matter to go before the courts? Because at the end of the day, there was one question and nobody's asking, and nobody wants to answer the question. If you are innocent, you have your day in court to prove yourself innocent. But you are innocent people or persons who are fearful for their lives. Those two categories. Why were you running from the police? What was the reason behind? And up to now, there has not been any information coming forth from any forum as to why these individuals ran from the police. And I'm just simply saying, and I can continue to say, I am not blaming the police officers for the police-involved shooting. I cannot blame protesters for protesting against the excessive use of force as they see it. You can have your freedom of rights. You can vote your opinion. You are entitled to protest if you feel that you're not given justice. But let us be fair. Let's be fair. No one is asking that question. Nobody is saying, listen, why, if you are innocent, why were you running?
I think your argument runs into two issues. One, members of the public have been asking that, right? It's just that that question has been overridden by how I believe this whole situation, and I've been operating under the assumption that at the very least there was some justification with the police opening fire. I'm not saying the police are innocent and that their behavior was without reproach, but I am, because the DPP has laid certain charges, there's some justification to laying those charges. That might be a better way of putting it, right? Because again, charges are not a conviction. And with that assumption, it's not about the innocence or guilt of Ms. Seeley or Mr. Samaru. It's about how this whole thing was handled. And because of how it was handled by leadership from the beginning, now trying to give out information will be seen with too much skepticism, because the court of public opinion is not fair. Because at the end of the day, and I've said this both with regards to the government and with regards to the commissioner, you're not operating on a blank slate. You're operating with, to some extent, the baggage of your predecessors, particularly with the commissioner of police. You could argue less so with the government, but I would say that even with the government, there are certain things and signs, myself included, that's going to trigger you quickly. You're going to make us, why does it look the same? It shouldn't look the same, right? And it might not always be fair, but that is, on some level, the court of public opinion will never be fair. But with the commissioner, especially the entity of the TTPS, has a long-term issue, right? And one could argue it's something he inherited. At the very least, you could say it maybe started or it was accelerated with the whole meritless fiasco, because then that now interfered with the perception of the independence of the office of the Commissioner of Police, and of course, the previous, and then also the effectiveness of the previous administration's last pick.
Yes.
And now, of course, you look at the current administration's pick, and, you know, depending on certain circumstances, you have questions. So then when he comes out and they take a defensive stance on both the shooting, which is not explained properly, like when you had to explain that counseling is standard procedure. It's not no special extra service. Oh my gosh, my poor snowflakes, are you all right? You all need counseling. No, it was standard procedure for any kind of police shooting. Just the basics of explaining the situation. He didn't do a good job with that. But then on top of that, when you got into the wider context of the issue stemming from the shooting, because the body camera debate came back up, because the Minister of Homeland Security all of a sudden created a debate that did not exist before with regards to, well, you know, you shouldn't reveal footage to the public, because, and how he framed it. I'm not saying this is intention, but it came across as though he was basically saying, yeah, well, if you reveal footage, how are we supposed to spin it? That's how it will, I believe it was interpreted by a lot of people, because I myself was looking at a statement, it's like, if you say like that, this is gonna come across as bad. Why are you making, like, I understand you want to protect the sanctity of evidence, but it didn't come across like that. It came across as though, no, we can't reveal things to the public. We just can't.
Yeah.
And that was after the body camera debate where they reiterated, look, apparently a media ambassador told a member of the public who then called in and told me that the process to get body cameras was underway. But the process is they're inviting people to tender, which is to say that they're still at the initial stage, right? There's no sense of urgency on that issue. So now, even the Express made the assumption, because the commissioner, and again, the commissioner did a bad job with regards to the charges. Charges will whatever,
Yeah.
and the assumption was it was the officers. So, and I don't think the Express was doing it with an agenda, because I myself was like, oh, they're actually going to charge them? That's interesting. Only to then, like within 24 hours, find out, no, they're charging Kaya Staley. And the public cannot keep up with these kinds of changes if you're not going to be. So now when they want to now say, oh, well, she had a Glock. Well, why didn't you say that from before?
And
you said you've at the very least revealed certain things about the shootings, police shootings in the past when they happened. It took 4 months. We didn't even know if a gun was recovered until, the week after the charges.
No, this particular incident, this particular police-involved shooting, in the manner in which it has been handled poorly, I might add, and how the information was shared on social media and everything else, it just simply shows that there's a lot of mistrust in the organization, administration of justice, and how things, and there's a lot of challenges that we face when it comes to getting justice, people's perception of getting justice in this country. We are in a state, we are currently in a state of emergency. Persons never felt that they were in a state of emergency.
Yes.
But the fact that you brought the state of emergency orders with respect to protest when the persons were vouching opinion, now that's a negative, that also aggravated the situation, because nobody felt that was in a state of, you were actually was in a state of emergency. Freedom of movement, so you allow freedom of movement back and forth, right? Persons were having freedom of expression at the same time, speaking and going on social media and voicing opinions about all of a sudden. But this particular situation, once the protest action starts to accelerate because of the outcome of it, right, or the perceived direction in which it was going. I wouldn't say the outcome, because the outcome is not there as yet. The direction in which it was going, persons were upset. Upset, justifiably so. Persons, you cannot get vexed. You cannot say that persons are not allowed to be upset. You cannot say persons are not allowed to express their views. What it is, the problem is that how their views are expressed and how they exercise those rights is a different situation altogether.
But you've run into this problem where we don't really have a proper mechanism.
And
our society is not accustomed
because the yardstick measurements are different for everybody.
And this is where I think you could say maybe it's a little unfair, although the current government has not disproven to operate differently or shown themselves to operate differently.
So
but the public is accustomed to the government, whichever one it is, ignoring them to some extent,
so the government,
unless they protest.
So the government of today is operating with respect to the true nature of our governments. They're operating in the same context. They're following the same handbook.
Right.
Operating in the same manner.
Yeah.
But but the population didn't want the same. Are there any precedents set for them to operate any way differently? No, there is not. Protest action is protest action is protest action. How protest takes place is against the law, right? Now, I have always find it very, the irony behind it is that you ask for permission to protest. I'm saying to myself, what is a protest? Why, if protest is illegal, no, there's protests and there's other type of things we call peace walk, right, and crime walk, and you're voicing your opinion, like vigils and all of those type of things. Those are not violent in nature. It's standing together for something, and you're standing up against something, speaking out against something. You're not protesting about it. There's a big difference between speaking out and protesting. When you're going to protest, there is an anticipation that protests could escalate in something more hostile,
and be disruptive,
and be disruptive, and have some level of confrontation. Persons don't understand that aspect of it. They believe protests, we have a peaceful protest. Now, promoters of protests don't have control of their protesters. Protesters, so when you have a crowd and you're managing a crowd and they have persons in a crowd starting to incite and aggravate, protesters start to follow. They start to incite each other. The crowd activities, we're talking about how people move together, how things start to change. And in our society, persons fail to realize that we have religious biases, we have religious discriminations, we have persons who don't like racial discriminations, we have political things are all underlined and lying, sometimes dormant within our society. Situations like these and things like these tend to bring them to the surface, and those persons who have who are a little more aggressive in their mindset, it boils over and it comes out in the public domain. Mm-hmm. You do have control over that. That is why we sometimes, when you have social media, it's such a dangerous place when people posting all kinds of things. I listened to some persons talking about this morning that the comment made by the young man about the Prime Minister and the Hindu community.
Oh, he went on, because I didn't.
I am saying that I'm listening to persons defending emotions. Sean, when you go on social media platform, it have no emotions there. You know why I'm saying that? You know fully well that I am on a social media platform and I am going to make a post. It is not something you and I have a conversation and all of a sudden an outburst and you could have remorse of something that they said. You plan that, right? There's a structure. You sat behind the computer, you sat behind a phone, and you deliberately made certain statements. You have to answer for it.
Generally speaking, while I would agree with you, I wouldn't necessarily say that it is unemotional, because our coach in the NFL, he's famous for saying, you know, whatever you do, don't press send. Because people who don't engage normally in that way, and he's mainly talking to athletes, right? But we tend to have this thing where, oh, we see an avenue for communication, we're upset, we'll just like, we'll take up a message now for now, and not necessarily always think through the message. That's why he says, don't press send. Type it, yeah, sure. Type it and reread it, and then maybe delete it, because no matter how good it might look to you in the moment, it probably is not something you should send out there, especially if you're a public figure. So there is some degree of emotion and emotional response on the internet.
I understand that. What I'm saying is that emotional response is one, but at the end of the day, when you, as you say, when you press send and you post online, there are consequences for those actions. Whatever consequences comes for those actions, and I am saying you have to be held accountable. We cannot be justifying persons' actions and make a defense for them, because what do we do when we see children exhibiting some levels of violence in school, and we start to blame the parents, the school, society, the environment? But sometimes the children know fully well, I am not supposed to assault another child or bully another child. I know fully well that is wrong. But you look for we look for an excuse to give them without an excuse being made. Right?
Well, I mean, that might be, how to say this? We might have imported that, because the tenor of politics, especially in the United States, I think there's a lot that we import. And so one of those things now is, because there's racial dynamics with regards to schooling and crime, all of a sudden there's a whole host of arguments with regards to why it cannot be things like indiscipline or bad behavior or deviant behavior. It has to be some host of circumstances that are external. And if we just magically solve those circumstances, then we'll solve the issue, which technically has yet to be practically implemented in any jurisdiction as far as I'm aware. Now, you could have those types of measures alongside hard enforcement measures, and usually that's what you need in just about any functioning society, any functioning community. You have to have both, right? Because the soft measures at some point are going to seem hollow and ineffective to the rule breakers without the hard measures.
And to add to this entire controversial issue with respect to freedom of speech and democracy, we are entering or coming to the end of this SOE.
You think it's going to end?
No, hear what I'm saying. We are coming to the end of this SOE, right? Whether I think it's going to end or not, I'm just simply saying this period is coming to an end. There must be an extension of the period, right? The dilemma of it is this. Without an SOE, is protest action legal or illegal?
I believe the whatever they declared to prevent protests from certain sites is tied to the regulations to the SOE.
The SOE.
Right.
But at the same time, the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, protest action is still illegal. You don't need an SOE for it.
Really?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I just want to point out to the public, and here's where we have an issue of not having a tradition of protest actions. In the sense of, as a society, do we understand?
So you,
because you've laid out, you know, this is a protest action, this is not a protest action, but it is something that we will probably just blanket label as protest action. You know, Arun did something similar on Monday, right? Although you all kind of did give slightly different ways of framing it and presenting it. But the long and short is, I think, if you go to the states, depending on certain areas, you will have activists who know the limits in this jurisdiction. This is what we can do, this is what we can't do, this is what we can't do to escalate, this is what we can't do to escalate. This is how we organize. Whereas here, we just protest. Everything is a protest. So, like all of those things, we just label as protests. Why we can't do it? Because we don't know.
So you cannot protest whether whatever administration, whatever parties in government.
So we can't walk?
Hold on, I never say protest. I said you cannot assemble around the parliament for the purpose of protesting in a hostile or manner. You can have a peaceful protest. You can vouch your opinion. And when I'm saying vouching your opinion, it doesn't mean shouting and pelting stones or anything like that. The police will manage that. The police will determine whether or not this is going beyond the parameters of a peaceful protest. Speak to you, you cannot be obstruct the free flow of traffic, and they designate an area where you can continue to voice your opinion. I'm using the word very mildly because it's voicing your opinion. I'm not saying protest. Protest is a different action altogether.
Legally.
Legally. So you can voice your opinion. You can demonstrate. You can put your placards. You can speak. Once you start to go beyond that boundary set by the law enforcement personnel, if they start to speak to you about, listen, you need to tone down, and they will inform you. Sean, they will come up and say, Sean Michael Small, you are in charge of this protest. You need to calm down your members, tone the voice down. We have no problem with you, X, Y, and Z. Once you start to become aggravated and say, listen to me, you start to raise your tone of voice to the police and tell the police X, Y, and start inside, the crowd start inside. You are now bordering on protest, and you are going beyond. You are going beyond. The police will be monitoring it. Now, when you look at the video where the senior officer was telling the individual, from a distance away, he was gesticulating, and I didn't hear the conversation, but it appears that the senior officer was telling the person to desist from what he was doing from a distance away. But you decide that now you want to raise your tone of voice, and based on the charges that the person would still aggravate the police officer. Police officer is telling you cannot protest here, go along your way. You insist to defy the instructions of the law enforcement officer. So at the end of the day, if we allow persons who have been given lawful instructions by a police officer to continue defying those instructions, we are allowing somebody to break the law in front of our face. You can be arrested and charged. It doesn't mean you have to get charged. You can be arrested because you have to desist. And that is why persons have a problem that when an officer gives you lawful instructions, comply with the lawful instruction. Those are the laws. And if you fail to comply with it, you may not agree, or you could disagree. You could voice your opinion, but it's a lawful instruction. If you don't, you're not supposed to park your vehicle here. You got a ticket, you're not supposed to park your vehicle here. Move your vehicle. But you decide that you want to be more confrontational than the police and ask the police if he knows what his rights are, you know what my rights are, you don't know the law, and all of that. All of that still comes down to failing to comply with the lawful instructions.
However, this is different than, say, a traffic stop, or jaywalking, or littering, or anything where I would always say comply with the officer, and if the officer does anything wrong, seek redress after. Ironically, this is a lot touchier, and I would argue.
I could give you my personal experience where I had to oversee protest actions. Good? They were given permission, legal authority for permission. The bodies that made the application, they were given permission for their protest action. Good? They got the documentation, given permission. They normally get written permission from the commissioner, the office of the commissioner, authorizing you to move from point A to point B, whatever you have to voice your opinion, X, Y, and Z within the, even play your loudspeakers and all kind of thing within whatever it is, right? Police will supervise it because there are guidelines given to the police officers similar to what they were given, so they have to operate within the guidelines. Sometimes they may go out, in the heat of the moment, certain things could happen. I remember certain organization was holding a protest to voice their opinions about certain type of thing in the government. And during the things, conversations started to get a little more elevated. And I approached the known individual, who is a very prominent individual. And I pulled him aside and had a conversation with the person that you need to tone down and encourage the protesters to tone down your volume, your language, and not stopping you from voicing your opinion, but your language starting to become, it can incite a little more. They agreed, and they did that. Protest was, they were able to protest what they came to do, right? Voice of opinion, the media was there, everything was dealt with, and the persons dispersed after the times that they were given, and everything else, and it was a very large protest, right? The voice of opinion. There are some persons who take it to the extreme, and in this case, that protest action around the parliament was carried to the extreme.
So here's the point I wanted to make. Because when you think that an officer is doing something wrong, there is the potential that officer is operating outside the law.
Yes.
That officer is potentially breaking the law. However, given the dynamics of the situation, it serves your purpose best to not try to fight the officer in the moment, because that will eventually lead to a bad confrontation where at the end of the day, you will be wrong. Now, the problem is with protests, the math changes.
It is.
Because you already have an issue in the court of public opinion, if it reaches that point. And the police now, it's not just about, well, the politicians and we want to protect their image. No, it's also for the police service. If the goal is to prevent violence and any sort of inciting escalation or incitement of escalation, the police at times can cause things to spark off due to the public having a bad reaction, even though you're doing your job as ascribed to the letter of the law. Because essentially that's what this whole Kaya Sealy Joshua Samru situation is from the beginning. It is the debate on who was right and who was wrong, which kind of throws aside the concept incorrectly that technically there are situations where neither could be wrong and there are situations where both sides could be wrong, and right? And we're just assuming it has to be one side or another.
No, there will always be.
I understand, but what I'm saying is most defenses, most arguments in the narrative, whether from the public or from the government or from the police, basically is colored with the implication that one side is right and one side is wrong in this situation. And that's why you're not seeing ground being given.
That's the unfortunate reality of what is taking place.
Right. So with regards to protests now, listen, we don't have a tradition of it, in part because we don't have a tradition of participating in democracy outside of elections and campaigning and stuff like that and voting. So we don't know what to do in between. One of the things that I could point to that at the very least, if it warrants it, is to say some kind of voicing your opinion, whether it's social media, whether it's protests, what have you. History has examples of movements essentially, technically breaking the law in order to force change. Now, you could debate on the how in each situation, how worthy the cause was, right? Some causes we would automatically say it's self-evident they're worthy. Other causes, like when certain racial proponent groups march, you'll be like, this is ridiculous. Why are you marching, right? They might have some point lost in the nonsense of what they're doing, but, you know, political messaging always has its baggage. But if you just take that out of context, and there are points in history where you're going to have resistance to the law because unfortunately the status quo is defended by the law. So now you have an ethical debate, which I did not envy the TTPS, and I knew immediately they were going to run headfirst into this problem. And the officers that dealt with it, I think, have done a relatively admirable job. Leadership, not so much. But this reminds me of during COVID-19, the first year, before George Floyd, there were protests.
And they will always be.
The protest was about the lockdown.
Yes.
And the lockdown was the legal measure to say that you can't protest. And at some point, it doesn't matter how legal it was. Ethically speaking, you're telling a democratic population, the thing you're protesting against, that's why you can't protest. So, and on some level, it's not quite as direct now, but on some level, that's kind of part of what you're seeing now. You're telling people, well, you can't protest the thing. And the thing you can't protest is on part of why you can't protest the thing. It's like, that's a self, you know, insulating situation that seems wrong.
So you have two situations on the scale where you have one to the extreme, one to the extreme, and the other. So we had the situation where the Maxi Taxi Associations, they had a protest on the priority bus route. Now their concerns are legitimate. That is not for me to discuss. To discuss. Right, that's for another forum. But it comes back to the conversation we were having with respect to the poor public service transportation infrastructure to support public transportation, right? Because if an entity like the maxi taxis go on protest, what happens with the general public? A lot of man-hours was lost. It was commendable for the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service as well as other organizations step forward
yes,
to assist in the situation. irony behind it is that the same police officers that you don't like was on that day was the police officers you were looking forward to go in a bus to provide transportation for you. That was the irony. That is the irony of the whole situation. So today I don't like you, but tomorrow I appreciate everything that you're going to, because it benefited them. It benefited the public.
I understand that, but there's a cynical way to interpret that as well, huh?
Fair enough. I am just simply saying.
It's like, oh wait, is the PNM giving out freeness to cover up that? Oh no, wait, it's the TTPS. It's not the PNM. It's not the UNC.
But at the same time, it shows how easy you can go from villain to hero in a couple of seconds. Right? It just shows.
This goes back to what I said. Why is it for you to appreciate somebody, now they have to be a saint and you have to exonerate them from whatever is hanging over their head? And now, if it directly is an example of why the accusations can't be true, that's different, right? If you're saying this person is a greedy thief of a politician, but their track record is basically doing work for the community and they drive a Tida, it's like, yeah, I don't think someone driving a Tida that lives in a one-bedroom apartment is stealing money.
In respect to this specific matter with the Kaya City incident, I would really want to hear this matter be ventilated in a court, put before the courts. And I'm still hopeful that in our society for transparency and democracy, that this be allowed to have telecast, televised. Right. And I am still hopeful, because this is, in my opinion, the amount of public commentary outside of the case that can cause some problems before it starts to be ventilated tried in the court. It has to be balanced, because a lot of opinions have already been made outside without any evidence or understanding of the entire matter.
Well, not just opinions, but accusatory opinions.
Yeah, exactly. So to balance, this is my view now, in order to balance or have some level of balance where we can bring back some level of transparency and accountability and trust in the entities responsible, the judiciary as well as law enforcement. If this matter, or should this matter be considered to be televised, right? It's still, I'm saying that is a decision not for me to decide, but it's something I would hope somebody would consider it, because it will give us and give Trinidad and Tobago a level of satisfaction, because the general public will be able to see and hear what is the evidence that was presented. Right now, all the evidence that we're hearing about is all kind of non-professional analyticals being done and analyzing only one aspect of the whole thing, and opinions and views, emotional and otherwise, being ventilated out in the public domain. The actual evidence is not there, and I think the actual evidence that has to be presented in court should be given, in my opinion, or should be presented, and let the media get that information, and let the public understand what is actually the evidence that is being presented in courts.
I will argue that historically we don't know how to deal with that equation of public interest versus private interest on matters like this, right? One of the things that would have nipped some of the accusations in the bud would have just literally to have a photo, okay, a Glock was recovered at the scene, right? Because they said shots were fired, and then they never said that they recovered a gun, to the point where, think about it. One of the reasons why people have been asking, why did they run? Think about the implication of asking that question. It means that 4 months later, the authorities could not give us even their theory as to what happened for the chase and why they ran. So you left the public open to speculate, and then you want to complain. You left the public high and dry with no information, and then when you complain when the public speculates because they have no information, because they have bad information.
And
now, here's the thing. Would you be surprised if this concept of yours actually starts to get traction, but then the Commissioner and Minister of Homeland Security come out and say, no, well, we can't do that because we have to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. And they weren't necessarily which individuals involved, but the people will interpret it as, we need to protect the privacy of the police officers involved and maybe the officers involved in the investigation because you don't want to have to deal with that level of scrutiny. That's how it will be interpreted.
No, yes, and I wouldn't be surprised because, like I said, there must be some level of consideration for the privacy, the security of the officers and the persons who are in the investigation. I understand all of that. I'm not saying that this would change the mindset of the population, the entire population. But it has, in fact, caused a lot more dissatisfaction in the whole thing because I have, since the incident took place, the amount of conversations, social media posts, analytical done by a lot of persons, speculatory, the amount of things that I'm saying there, I haven't heard the charges that is to be laid. Even the charges that were to be laid, there's no explanation as to how those charges would be or why those charges were considered. No.
No, this is an area where I said this. I think it would have served the situation well if the DPP could have had a press conference, but I am under the assumption that he technically cannot. No, he is bound by some sort of rule or regulation that says he cannot.
Probably he is. I'm not aware of it, and I don't think it would have been outside of my professional capacity as a legal profession. I do not think it would have been appropriate in any context for.
To explain why he advised charges.
It is going to be a difficult situation for even to put the DPP, because the officer DPP. I am saying this from what I understand. The little that I understand of the officer DPP, the officer DPP advises the investigators, the investigators on what charges to lay based on what was presented to him. Mm-hmm. Given an explanation, it means that you are now sub-judiciary, given an explanation what was presented to you. That is not what the office should be doing. That whatever he has presented, he gave advice on it, it goes before the court to be adjudicated.
You see, but here's where now, I understand you want to be proper with regards to your process, but at some point, it could, to some extent, be counterproductive. Well, because
that's the risk.
You see, unfortunately,
this is the risk that we face. And what?
But look at our history. History has shown that the policies that we have decided to adhere to, the principles that, to be honest, seems more like a shield of an excuse than actual principles to lay a foundation for a proper functioning democratic society, has not been working because it is directly attributable to the trust and confidence that the public has in the police.
Every incident in our lives, right, and in your life is an experience to learn from. Some persons repeat the same mistakes.
Right, but think about it.
You learn from it.
You're doing this thing to prevent unfair speculation from the public and unfair influence on the case. Except look at what's happening. But you have the public unfairly speculating, and there's concerns that it's unfairly going to influence the DPP.
Exactly.
So what you're doing is actually pushing the outcome you're trying to prevent.
No, you cannot say that you're unfairly. You cannot say for sure that the independent office of the DPP would be influenced.
Right, but the problem is it's like a conflict of interest. You just need perception. You don't need it to actually exist. How is the public now, including whatever defendant over whatever cases, whether it's Kaya Sealy, or if the officers get charges for anything, how are they going to then say, we have confidence that the DPP was not influenced?
So here's an argument towards that. Has there been any conversation or any negative reaction to the decision to charge the stepfather of Angelo?
And unfortunately, I don't believe so. I haven't seen it. But you see, the problem is And this is where the politicians get into trouble. I kind of understand the logic, but it doesn't work on this level because the court of public opinion is not based on reason.
Exactly. That is what I'm saying. It is not based on reason because of emotions and everything else.
Yes, but the point is, when you have Senior Counsel Israel Khan and I believe Defense Attorney Farid Ali, not necessarily going as far as the Prime Minister, I'll get to that in a second, but basically warning against, I can't remember if Karen was also quoted in that story. They were basically, but she does have this concern as well with regards to criticisms of the DPP and what the court of public perception and opinion can do to the office and the perception of the office of the DPP. They have warned against that influence. And the thing is, now the defense lawyers, they don't need to prove it once it's reasonable that the DPP may have been affected in some form or fashion.
Sean, you and I, at this point in time, where the line that you are going down, that is for court. There is no way that you and I could be discussing that because that is a if any defense lawyer wishes to bring the office of the DPP in disrepute with respect to influence in a court, the judge will deal with that. I cannot sit here and believe or make any interpretation that the office of the DPP or any defense lawyer would want to come out and say the office of the DPP or the DPP himself is influenced by this. The office of the office, if I understand the DPP makes judgment on what is presented to him.
Yes.
And I'm saying this to bring the narrative back. We have a view on what was the direction the DPP gave with respect to the Kaya City incident. No one is complaining about the directions given. Hold on. No one is outcry about the directions given to the situation in Tobago. Why? Emotions.
There is one.
What?
With regards to the investigation, the Chief Secretary.
Listen.
Right. But
Sean, but that is different.
Outside of that, well, it's connected, but outside of that, yes, it is, because they provide the evidence to the office of the DPP, not so. But outside of that, right, it's because the narrative was not so dreadfully bungled, because again, the thing is, you are talking about how things should be if everything conforms to the laws that we have. And I am saying that the proper procedures that we have proven to be ineffectual when trying to deal with the complexity of a democratic society. Because unfortunately, in any sort of society that allows any kind of free thinking, it comes with opinions. And leading such or governing such a society, you have to go beyond what our potentially archaic laws says the process needs to be, particularly since these laws were in part designed to defend a monarchy's existence and not necessarily deal with a democratic society. That's where we inherited it from. I understand what you're saying, but you are not accounting the fact of the practical human factor that is being experienced in all of these situations like this, which leads to leaders, politicians, commissioners of police being eviscerated by the court of public opinion because they're operating on a wavelength that is not treating with the problem at hand. And the problem at hand is not what is the proper procedure to handle this situation. The problem at hand is how do we prevent the court of public opinion from going out of control and causing issues that technically the rules are supposed to prevent, but they are not.
So you cannot prevent the court of public opinion going out of hand. Why? Because we are in democracy. We have freedom of speech, freedom of expression, which is controlled to some extent in the manner in which how you operate. Several persons have felt the brunt of the law when they step beyond the boundary line. What we don't know is the boundary line. Some persons are not aware of the boundary line. Even journalists found themselves in a position where they went beyond the boundary line. But in a democracy, and I continue to say, we are in a democracy. We ask for democracy, but at the same time, persons don't understand how to operate in a democracy.
Listen, I understand as a former member / technically still current member of law enforcement where you're coming from. I also understand that this is going to run contrary to the argument of we need to enforce all our laws. But at the end of the day, a democracy is based on a system of laws that was not decided upon by God upon high and are perfect. They are decided upon humans, which we technically are already assuming to be flawed.
Exactly.
Right? So listen, let me put it this way. My thing with regards to the protest was, I have no problem with you protesting. You need to be prepared to be arrested if you break the law protesting, but I have no problem with you protesting if you want to send a message, if you want to voice your opinion, and you want to go that far in doing so, right? With regards to things like that, this is why I said, this unfortunately is part of the democratic process, right? Let's put it this way, there's a lot of ills of society where if we just followed the law, they would technically continue because they were legal at the time. Slavery at one point was legal at the time. Apartheid in South Africa was legal at the time. Yes. Technically speaking, the Nazis in Germany were legal at the time. Now a lot of that was because, not so much not always because of the law, but also because of how society viewed things, what they tolerated, how they were led, how they were managed, what they were convinced of, right? And it is near impossible to run a society strictly by the law. You yourself have said it. If we were to enforce all the laws on the books, right?
We would have protested already.
Society, right, is not ready for that. Because if you can guarantee to the public that all the laws are the best at managing this situation, that'd be different. But we can't guarantee that, in part because, one, it is not handled in a similar manner in other jurisdictions, and we see the examples of that, where the prosecutor will explain why the charges were laid without necessarily going into all the evidence, where the police will give you an entire animation of what the crime scene was, how the shooting went down, and why the officers decided to make decisions that they made. And if that means that it exonerates the officers, so be it. And if that means that it causes the officers to get charges, so be it. Not every jurisdiction, but we've seen it happen, right, at some point or another. And it's not always only in the courtroom, right? Which means that there is in between giving away everything and saying nothing.
Even in those jurisdictions where all the explanation, or as much explanation as is necessary, is given to the public, you still get protest. Because some persons still don't believe everything that the police officers have. And that is balancing, that's the balancing act that they would have.
Right? But you see, I understand, listen, and that's why we also, on the same vein, no reasonable person is going to expect the police to reduce the murder rate of a 1.4 million population down to 0.
And no reasonable thinking person.
Right? But I am not demanding that the government communicate and be transparent enough that there will be no protests.
But we have.
Right? What I'm pointing to is the fact that, look, there is a proportionality relation of the less transparency, the greater the public outcry, and proper leadership. Even in the private sector, you have to be concerned about things like this.
So the transparency, the lack of transparency or lack of trust and confidence in our state entities didn't happen yesterday. It started to erode over a period of time from last administration and the manner in which the other state agencies was operating,
right,
all the way down to today.
But we're not debating on necessarily, right, this part of the conversation is not about the political party in charge.
No, I'm not talking about political party.
This part of the conversation is the standard operating procedures that most people in authority in this country seemingly operate under, and the fact that that is, in my mind, an argument in my favor. This is how we've always done it. And over time, it has slowly but surely gotten worse and worse and eroded itself.
We have a caller. You can take that caller.
Oh, you're a taker. All right, we have a remote line caller. Good morning. You're on the air.
Hi, good morning, Sean.
Caller, good morning. You there?
And good morning. I think it's Mr. Ali there.
Morning.
Your guest?
Yes.
Morning.
Morning.
Yes, Sean, I want to commend you this morning. The hair looks so fantastic. It looks magnificent. I love the hairstyle this morning.
Excuse me?
Yes. You know what is it I want to ask? I want to ask a question this morning. Would we be having an Independence Day parade in August coming? I just curious. I want to know, because if we can't march and we can't protest, what is significant of having that? Because I mean, Independence Day is Trinidad and Tobago, and that is a significant time of people's lives, right? And now it seems to me like you can't even enjoy that anymore. And we will be still having one. Could you answer that question for me, please? I want to ask the government that the government should let us know, let the people of this country know if there will be any Independence Day parade. Because I mean, oh God, is every year last year, all you take it away, all you say this and that. Now this year it seems to me like it alleged, they said, they might bring in another SOE, right? So I want to know what is going on. We already don't have anything to celebrate in this country. We have nothing to watch, right? And if all you take away that again, which means all you don't want the citizens of this country to enjoy nothing. Nobody but we have nothing. We have no voice. We have nothing. So I would like to know that. Please, government, could you answer that question for me, please? Because I find it is nonsense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller. Now, if this was last year, post-announcement of no Independence Day celebrations, I didn't say this and I wouldn't have said it then, but the door has been opened, I think, to consider the fact that whether intentional or unintentional, it could be very well, it's probably unintentional. I've already spoken about a lack of patriotism. You don't necessarily see a national identity and people come there. You see political identities. And then you see people who don't have a political identity. I don't trust none of them. But you don't see the identification of individuals. Yes, when I show speed comes down, all of a sudden we wave any flag. But to say on a daily basis, we wave the flag, we respect the anthem and the flag and the coat of arms. We believe in the unity of being Trinbagonian and what that means at the end of the day. When the chips falls, if somebody wants to challenge us from the outside, if there's some natural disaster, if something goes wrong, we could always fall back on our identity as Trinbagonians. I don't know if we have that, and I feel as though it will be viewed and there will be some practical effect of undermining that when you take what little national symbolism that we have and you deny it. And again, I'm saying I believe it's unintentional, but I think it has eroded part of the patriotic spirit. All right, they want us to take Shogunas on the line. Caller, good morning.
Yeah, morning.
Morning, caller.
Right?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Morning. Good morning, Sean. Good morning to your guests. All right. The problem we have is see a lot of people. I mean, I guess I know is a former police officer or whatever, right? And what we seem to be doing is doubling down and trying to just maintain the status quo. Whenever there's a crime incident or something, there's not only one victim, you know. There could be a casualty, right? But there are many victims. In this particular incident, Justice Somaru, I feel I am a victim. I am mentally and emotionally traumatized by what happened, right? And what we want us as a law and we want justice, right? And there's video evidence in front of our eyes. Now let me go back to a different outcome. The police officer chasing them for whatever reason. The car gone down in a ditch. The car moved. The police officers came out. Now, if we had seen Joshua Samaru with a gun pointing at the police outside of the police and then they shoot, right, it would be a different outcome. And next scenario is the police and them, the car immobilized in a ditch, the police and them take cover. They tell the suspect, okay, there's the police, come out with their hands up, so, and the police apprehend them. They could have got a million charges. Nobody don't know who's Joshua, someone who's Kaya Silly, and they didn't care. That is it, right? The court will ventilate that. But we see the action of the police in the eyes. Now, listen to this. For the past recent demonstration, the police keep happening of people acting in a way to endanger public safety. Now, look at that video. Prior to the car coming to that thing there, right? I saw 2 vehicles came out of that street. So that means that there's a traffic in the area. One of them gets stuck in between the police vehicle. And they engage in a gunfight. In that galvanized wall. When I watched the video, I seen clothes and happening. The police never assess the situation to see if other vehicles coming out, if anybody in the area. They assess, they just start shooting and things just so. So they mean acting a way to endanger public safety. Right? And we keep doubling down on that. People hurting, brother. I traumatized by this emotionally. Right? I feel like I'm a victim. Right? And that's the sentiment going on. And instead of trying to pacify that, you come to give it law. And what the DPP think and this and that. We want justice. People crying out for justice. And this thing will keep escalating and all. They keep doubling down. Right? And going on and going on and going on. Right? Thanks a lot, Sean. Somebody else.
Thank you, Carl. I'll say this. Let me say it first. Sorry, I'm not going to just accuse Ashraf of doubling down. You can make a case that it could appear that the police rushed to engage and that did endanger the lives of civilians in other vehicles that did not clear the area. However, that still requires assessing what did they see, what was their justification for making the decisions they made, right? Now, granted, without things like body camera, dash cam footage, we might never know certain things outside of the opinions of the officers sharing what they believe to be the truth, what they are claiming. But for you to definitively say certain things that could appear on the video, you still need to assess why did they make the decision. Now, maybe they don't have a good reason, and then you'll be like, oh, so there was no good reason. Was it reckless? But you still have to go through that process. It's more than just, well, how it looks, right? Because a gunfight, regardless of whether the other side shoots or not, there's a lot of moving parts to it, which is one of the reasons why traditionally Ashraf and I have had this conversation many times. You know, you can't, one, with regards to home defense and things, tell people exactly what to do in those kind of confrontations because they could go into so many different directions. And police shootings, that's the same thing. You can't just easily look at it one view and I know exactly what happened because there potentially are so many moving parts. We do not know from the video what was happening inside the car. That is the unfortunate reality. So all of the concerns have to stop at concerns. They cannot be statements of fact. Right? We have to operate in that sphere because you have to apply your principles of innocent until proven guilty to everybody. Otherwise, our criminal justice system will break down. We have Dabity, I think, on the line. Yep. Dabity, good morning.
Hey, Sean. Yes, good morning.
Morning.
Sean, I'll be sure this morning. I find that you are on the defensive and the only point that the ASP making, you are actually trying to refute it. Look at the DPP office, which is supposed to be an independent body, a body that should be well respected. Who? And
call us, something's wrong with your connection.
To them. You hear me better now? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
And what I'm saying to do is that the essence of this whole thing is that, and I said it before, we are too lawless. You have some callers calling in, they watch a 8-second clip on the social media and they come to a conclusion like that. Are we dumb in this country?
I wouldn't go so far. I wouldn't go so far, caller.
Hadn't this gentleman gone over a ditch with his car, he would have been still on the run. He had an opportunity not to drive off from the police in Maloney. Why didn't he surrender then? It has so many unanswered questions, probably on both sides. But my point that I want to drive to this morning, Sean and ESP, is that we are not persons, we are not law-abiding. If you go out on the highway now and you take a ticket book, you could empty it in 3 hours' time. Who not driving recklessly, who not driving on the shoulder, who doing all kind of craziness. Why can't we at least once, we here in Trinidad and Tobago, abide by the law? And I mean the police officers too. Some of them are not law-abiding either. So that's my little contribution this morning, and I think that the ASP is on the money, and it will all come out in the court, you know. All the evidence that the police probably not letting the public know, but the police not supposed to let the public know of all the evidences they have. Let the court decide that. But we here now want to be all 1.4 million attorneys, 1.4 million prosecutors. We are all looking to try and come up with a conviction. And we are all saying that the police is at fault. Hey, gentlemen, you all have a wonderful program. I'm locked on and listening, and I really wish that normal laymen, normal citizens of the country would be more law-abiding. Stop throwing KFC box out of your car. All a cigarette butt on the street. Walk through Port of Spain and see how nasty it is. Go down on the promenade, Brand Lara promenade, and see what has happened there anytime after 8 o'clock in the night. And you pass there 6 o'clock in the morning. It is stink. You know? And who you all blame? The corporation? Is the corporation that's be gambling there on the Brand Lara promenade during the night?
Last year again, caller.
Lovely program. I'm locked on and listening.
Thank you. First of all, I don't think I'm on the defensive. I think I'm making a reasonable case that the status quo isn't working. I'll just say this. Is it the public that's lawless? I'll throw out a name. You tell me what you think, Burroughs. I'll throw out the fact that ASP Arun has come on the show and he has said, look, we do charge police officers for things. We do investigate them. We do, and at times convict them more than the public knows. The problem is the status quo works if the status quo is perfect, but the status quo is not perfect. In part because the public is responding to what they perceive as the lawlessness of politicians and within, not necessarily the entire, police service.
And that is an unfair assessment because we keep saying it, or I keep saying it over and over, and because we tend to only watch what other persons is doing and say those are the examples that we want to set. Why do you not set the better example?
But you see, there is an issue that separates this situation from most other situations.
Because at the end of the day, it has nothing to do with police. It has nothing to do with the government. Drivers and I'm going to give an example for this. Drivers will go on the road, police or no police, they will still breach our red light. They will still drive on the side of the road. They will still exceed the speed limit. The fact of the matter is that we do not abide by the law. We want to be policed. And when you want to be policed, you are aggrieved because you're sorry because the police stopping you because you don't want to be you don't want to be policed, but you want police you.
Yes, but,
right?
but
we don't abide by laws.
Don't you agree that the police are held to a higher standard?
Even if the police...
And can it function if they are not?
So I am simply saying this. If a police officer who's supposed to be held at who should be held at a higher standard drives on his shoulder, because the police drive on his shoulder, is it all right that all drivers say, listen, the police doing it, I have to do it? It is the same narrative we keep saying over and over. If a parent is a delinquent, a parent is not operating as a parent, the child follows the parent. The cycle keeps going on, and the cycle keeps going on. And we have to stop blaming or looking for excuses. And
but once you reach an adult, rhetorically speaking, the parents, it's not because of the biological it's not because of the biological connection in that analogy. That analogy is about authority figure, person that has to follow authority figure. That's why I didn't just say police alone.
That is what
I said politicians.
Good. So we have the issue of authority figure and we have politicians. We don't view persons in authority as persons in authority alone. We have different opinions of authority figures. Police officers are persons in authority. But our perceptions and our views of police officers bypasses the fact that they are authority. Right? So we don't respect the authority, you know. We have other perceptions. Yes, I know,
but now you have to ask yourself, where did the disrespect come from? Did it come first from the public wanting to be disrespectful, or did it come first because the perception of the institution is tarnished by bad apples, and the institution cannot figure out how to fix that?
We have San Fernando, and we're going to San Fernando right now, but it is what our society has become, or should I say, what we continue to be acceptable in our society. If we keep accepting the wrong things, it will turn out to be...
Right, but it didn't start overnight, right?
No, it didn't start overnight.
We built towards it, right?
So it is not one entity. It's how we in society...
It comes back to my point. I would argue, Mr. Dabadi, you and Inspector Ashraf are being defensive, because my ultimate point is this: the status quo is not working, and you have to go back to the caller. I'm going to take some time now, but the caller before Dabadi, what did he say? When he saw the video, he was traumatized.
Fair enough.
Right? Because that is a specific example where the police behavior and conduct in the video is questionable. Like I said, I would not agree with Dabadi to say that everything that the caller said before him was wrong. I just would say that the caller can't say that as a statement of fact. It can be a concern. We have Sanford on the line. Caller, good morning. You're on the air.
It's Diego Martin here.
Diego Martin. Okay.
Sorry, Diego.
Good morning.
Mr. Small, good morning, and Mr. Ali, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, morning.
I just want to say that everybody is still carrying on with this Bmobile business. The DPP came out and made a statement. And people must try to recognize that and try and honor it for the time, until it goes to court and everything is, played out. Because the DPP ain't no madman to come out and make a statement, knowing what he knows, that none of us know. And, whatever plays out in court, he said plainly, being charged doesn't mean you're guilty. So, the fact is that people wait and see what emotions playing out right now, because what you saw on the video, it looks like a one-sided thing. And you can't look at it that way. All the facts has to be played out. And we don't have that. I don't think anybody here who's looking on have that. So we'll wait and wait for justice to come out, and everybody will be happy one way or the other. So the next thing, put that into granny there. Just like myself and my grandfather, I like to watch my independence. But there are certain things that, prevented independence from being played out. I mean, the government is under some strong pressure for money. So they're trying to cut and save on all about the place. They sure to end up with the policies of the corporation. They took on the spell of the money for the independence in the area. Now they find difficulty in paying the bills and trying to pay the staff. So people have to understand that the government have to try and prioritize what they have to prioritize. because as far as I see it is that they're moving money from one place to the other and trying to battle with it until they can get themselves going. But and the next thing is whenever they pay a bill, there's someone will file up from the last government that it goes towards that, and then it comes like they didn't pay this last one. So people have to understand that and try and work with the government and work with the police. The police, let me tell you something, the police of 50 or 40 years ago is entirely different things now, no? Because the behavior of people now is 20 or 50 times worse than how police behaved long time. And the modern day police have to put up with that. So people try and be patient and try and understand things and not be irrational. Thank you for taking my call and have a good weekend.
I'll try and be quick. One, independence celebration should indirectly have payoffs to society when done properly. So you can't justify the expense, and you can actually see it as a net loss by not having it. But that's predicated on doing it properly, which arguably I will agree with you on the basis that we don't really handle things like that properly. We kind of do it just because we're supposed to do it, and it doesn't have the effect that it's supposed to have. Now, with regards to the whole situation about the DPP's decision, here's the thing. None of my arguments are predicated on the DPP being wrong. None of them. I am speaking about how the situation has been handled, how the emotions of the population has been mismanaged. And if you want to complain that the population is being unreasonable, well, it's only people who are managing the situation from a position of authority that have themselves to blame. Once you make a first wrong decision, it doesn't matter if you stick within your rules. All your decisions afterwards are effectively going to be wrong because you laid the foundation of putting yourself in an undefensible or untenable or unmanageable position from the beginning. However, that said, the Prime Minister did not help situations. We haven't even gotten to that yet. They say Diego Martin. Diego Martin on the line? Puna. Oh my gosh, I heard Diego Martin. That is my mistake. That is my mistake. I actually wondered if, I don't know why, I expected it to be Mrs. San Fernando actually. Diego Martin. Diego Martin on the line? Puna?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Why?
Good.
Mute your TV, caller. Mute your TV.
Good morning, gentlemen. Oh yes, let me
mute your TV, caller.
Mute my TV.
Yeah.
I'm muting my TV. Yes. Good morning, gentlemen. I would like Mr. Ali to give his informed definition of what is a protest action. I'm asking this within this context because it's my view that freedom of expression is a form of protest. And illegality only comes about when, in attempting to make that freedom of expression, you're likely to incite some form of violence or so on. So I will listen to Mr. Ali's response. Thank you.
Thank you, caller.
Well, see, so a protest action is any action or any demonstration aimed at expressing dissatisfaction or disapproval to a specific issue or incident. The word dissatisfaction, disapproval. I think persons are mixing up expressing your views as opposed to being dissatisfied. You can express your views about something. You could express your views. That's why I didn't want to use the word protest and expression of expressing your views or expressing your opinions in the same sentence. Because when you protest, you're dissatisfied. Your disapproval of a certain incident. But you could express your views not being dissatisfied or because you have a strong opinion about something that happened, right? It's very closely linked to each other, so that is why it is very, the lines are very blurred as to when you can cross or when you cross. Normally, people view, when they hear protests, is that you're dissatisfied with something and you're voicing your views against that particular action.
But also, I would assume publicly, right?
Publicly, right? So it have different types of protest actions.
And when I say publicly, I don't mean in a bar.
Right? So you have plenty different type of protest actions. You could have a crime walk. Let's say a crime walk. You're protesting the level of crimes and things, but it is done non-violent. It is not non-violent. Then there are demonstrations, public demonstrations that does not have to be violence, any sort of violence. You can demonstrate without going beyond the scope of violence. So it is because of the fact that our Constitution is not clearly defined as what is called freedom of speech, freedom of expression. There are little blurred areas in it. There's a lot of blurred.
From what I understand, we do not technically have freedom of speech. We have freedom of expression.
Right. So it is very blurred because the people mix both of them together. Because
again, we import. So we see.
So we use the language loosely without understanding there are there are thin lines.
Yeah.
That you could start a protest. Sorry, you can start a voice of action, which is we call a demonstration or demonstrate your objection to something, and then all of a sudden, during that demonstration, it escalates directly into a violent confrontation.
The reason for the difference is our laws are based on a system that is a democracy under a monarch. And that's why in the UK, I believe, this is my assumption, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a UK lawyer, but that's why in the UK, if you speak about the TTPS like some people do on Facebook, if this was the United Kingdom, you probably would have been arrested already.
So I know we have a caller online. The maxi taxi protest.
But there wasn't.
No, the maxi taxi is protest.
It was like a sick out or a set out.
There was a protest for the association. They were protesting issues.
Right.
Non-violent in their nature by reserving their services or holding back their services. Right? It was non-violent. That is a protest. They were allowed to protest.
Let's get San Fernando now. Caller, good morning. You on here?
Hey, morning, Sean. Morning, Sally.
Morning.
Yeah. The question has to be asked, Sean, based on the video that the public has seen. This is the issue. The public saw a video, and the public is asking themselves, or as asking the police, did whatever happen, and they don't know exactly what happened before, but whatever happened before, does it justify the end which was seen in the video? And this is the question here. And because this is the impression that is that the end was not justified, that is why you have this uproar. There was a protest which is said it was supposed to be a peace march. That peace march, I could understand the anxiety of the police with that peace march, because that thing sends some serious signals. I saw that on the news clips there, based on information that is publicly available. I saw people from 6, I saw people from 7, I saw people from 8 ABG, and that is those people that I saw. That information is publicly available on the internet and that type of thing. That sends a frightening signal, because those were young people. That sends a frightening signal to the police and to the nation. That you see where this thing is going. You see how it is morphing into something else, which the authorities seem to be anxious about, and rightly so. The other, and I'll leave that there for now, Sean, but let me see. The other thing I want to go to what David said. Good morning, David, about the lawlessness in Trinidad and Tobago. Let me just give you this quick example. On Tuesday, I went from San Fernando, I went to Arima Then I went to El Secura, and then I went back to San Fernando. And if it is that I had 2 officers with me, right, in a unmarked car, and they had ticket books, I am certain I could have made $100,000 on the road in ticket fines, and there's a minimum of $100,000. With what I saw on the road between San Fernando to Arima, Arima to El Secura, and El Secura back to San Fernando. That is how ridiculous this place is getting. Have a good weekend, gentlemen.
Thank you, Paul. I think the problem is, I don't think that debate is directly correlated as Dabidi would want it to be with regards to what has happened. Because again, it matters not to me if Kaya Sealy is innocent or guilty. What matters to me is you had a very complex situation. You had a Minister of Homeland Security, which, to be honest, it's not his fault that he was not prepared to deal with a public relations situation like this. And he was left on his own to deal with it. And then, on some level, what the commission, as much as I would criticize the commission on Minister of Homeland Security, I think what the wider cabinet and the Prime Minister has done, both in their silence for the first 4 months and subsequent statements with regards to the protesters, because we haven't reached necessarily, at least when the Prime Minister first spoke, the elements I believe that Santana was talking about being part of it just yet. We haven't reached there just yet, right? It didn't help that the Prime Minister basically, to paraphrase, called the protesters grifters and other things that imply that they were immoral criminals themselves, as opposed to, well, when people have an issue with how the video looks and how the video makes the police look, and the Prime Minister is going to essentially blame the protesters / blame the public who have questions on the video, it makes the situation even more unmanageable. Whether you agree with the Prime Minister or not is actually besides the point. It is, are you helping the situation or are you not helping the situation? We have a caller quick. I think this needs to be the last call. Shogunas, caller, good morning. And then Ashraf, you could respond.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, good morning, Sean. Just calling back. I just cool down a little emotionally, right? So, on the other issue, on this issue of protest, right? If the police seem to be more bent on clamping down the protests, right? Now, provided we have a state of emergency and all kind of stuff and things. See, just like how they say the 15 places and things that you can protest, why they didn't say where you could protest? I've been in the trade union movement and all kind of things for years, protesting Port of Spain. A protest in Port of Spain, where does be all over Port of Spain, is either by the Red House or in Woodford Square, right? I mean, one time it was over the waterfront because the Parliament had moved on to the waterfront, and that is why it was there. But most of in history, most of the protest action take place around Woodford Square. Now, if you confine the protest action to Woodford Square, the police have a much easier time. They could just cordon off the area around Woodford Square, and all the protest action or demonstration take place inside Woodford Square. I mean, if they want to march in the streets of Port of Spain, that's a different thing. I have to get permission to do that, right? But let people go in Woodford Square and vent and give the protest. They ain't blocking no sidewalk. They ain't getting on unruly. Everybody confined in Woodford Square, and the police cordon off Woodford Square, and they tell people, look, no demonstration in the street. They want to protest. They go in Woodford Square, right? And let people vent and cool off. But they seem to be bent on no protest at all. All no protest. All don't say nothing. Right? And, you know, that's my suggestion there. Confine all the protests, all the demonstration to Woodford Square.
Caller, I'll have to cut it there.
And the police cordon off there. It's not nobody breaking up nothing and causing no violence, no nothing. And they just cordon off the place and
Caller, thank you, but we're running out of time. We're running out of time. I don't want to give Ashraf time to respond and maybe time to respond to me after, but I don't know if you have anything to say now or if you want to.
No, we could. I think we discussed a lot of the issues with respect to the issues with protests. They designate some areas when it comes to no protesting.
Yes.
Even if this caller will make suggestions, even labor protests had in Woodford Square already. But it's not about confinement alone. If they were allowed to go into the square, that would be okay. But they choose not to. The police will not tell you where you can protest. The police will tell you if you could protest or not. Right? In this circumstance, we're in a state of emergency. There are designated areas that form that have been identified.
That's telling people where they can't protest, right. So go over there.
Good. So we cannot protest, I'm saying, but I can't tell you where to protest. Now, once you could protest anywhere else, but there are designated areas, right, because of national security issues as well as security issues, you cannot protest.
Now, to the caller, there's two issues. One, I wouldn't say let them vent, because that actually goes towards the direction of what the police are afraid of, which I believe is the protest getting out of control, which is technically not necessarily how the Prime Minister was framing it. So I don't have an issue with regards to the police officers. Again, there was an ASP that basically said, I empathize and I feel for the public and what they're going through. And why can't his bosses say these things, right? Also, if the numbers get too large and then it spills out over Woodford Square, then Woodford Square is not necessarily, I know in theory, right? It has to happen first, but still, it's not going to be the be-all solution. And then what do you do? Because potentially at that point, the numbers might be so large, the sidewalks also are not going to be enough. So now I understand, but then if it gets to that point, how does the police now keep it under control without it spilling out into the streets and causing unauthorized traffic disruptions? So
there is a bigger issue to consider going forward. Like I said earlier, we are on the we're approaching the end of this SOE period. Approaching the end of this SOE period, whether it is an extension or not, that's for Parliament to discuss and to decide. But then there's a bigger picture for the wider population, law enforcement to consider going forward. Mm-hmm. Hypothetically, if the SOE is no longer, there's no more extension, there's no SOE regulation anymore that stop protesting actions around. The laws, the existing laws which governs protest in the country, when you're assembling, will apply. Mm-hmm. The Red House will still be part and parcel of it, how you can protest and how to protest. But we run the risk now, and that's what I'm saying, this is where we have to manage, the law enforcement has to manage this situation, because outside of the SOE, if these sorts of actions, protest actions, are allowed to just sporadically take place and say persons have a right to protest, you can end up in situations where, or a situation where certain type of groups gets involved in it and takes and causes a non-violent protest or non-violent demonstration and carries it across the threshold, and it becomes a bigger issue for law enforcement to deal with now.
So I'll try and be brief. I think one of the things with this situation is people subconsciously are cluing into things that are not totally right. Why are the police so aggressive to shoot someone with his hands up, right? Why was there no information? You could be limited in the information. I'm not saying reveal the whole case, but even details that we would have normally gotten in similar situations, we didn't get. And then now the problem is you also have to, and then of course there was your, like I said, body camera debates and all of that. But now you have to add in the political, the real political dimension, even though I would argue the commissioner and the minister was being political before. Failing at it, in my opinion. But when the Prime Minister weighed in and potentially vilified the protesters, but then, and this is the key, when you look at the list of places, I don't have the list right now, right? Most of it deals with national security. Then you have the Airports and Port Authority building, which I wonder why they were included. It's understandable as a preventive measure, but still, right? Because what are we concerned about? Protest against a police shooting, right? undue influence on people like the DPP if they protest on his office. That's what Israel Khan Senior Counsel said, amongst others, right? Except there was one addition on the list that I found interesting and 2 items left off that's interesting. The 2 items left off was anything to do with judiciary, where you would think the last thing we want is people protesting and harassing and influencing judges if they could influence the DPP on that measure. I'm not going about whether it's right or wrong or if it actually happens, I'm just saying. Then it could also happen to judiciary staff, right? And to be honest, they probably shouldn't be protesting at the High Court and blocking the High Court and all of that and causing a scene there. And also the Forensic Science Center, Arun pointed out, there's drugs and guns going back and forth all the time. You don't want the public to interfere with that. Those were left off. But what was included was the Ministry of Finance, which is very interesting because we're probably weeks away from the mid-year budget review. So the problem is, it doesn't matter if this is the government's intention. People, like myself, will at least ask the question, and if I ask the question, it means that somebody thinks it's likely, and then there'll be somebody else that thinks it's a certainty. If I ask the question, that means there are people with stronger feelings on this than me. Are they heading off potential protests and using this as an excuse because they expect the public to this to continue and they just don't want to deal with it, right? Whether the media budget review warrants protests or not. So it's become political, in part because the government has not really shown any better leadership than its one Minister of Homeland Security or the Commissioner of Police. And I would argue this is not a question about law and order. At the end, this is a question about leadership. Leadership is within those areas where the rules can't tell you what to do. Because anybody in any paramilitary organization will know when you have a fresh-faced officer, leadership candidate, that just goes by the book, that 9 times out of 10 is a very good way to lose respect from his command, whether slowly or quickly, because he lacks flexibility, right? I think this is, you apply the principles, it's similar, not the same, right? There's no perfect way how to do it. It just is. We see the results are not working out. Not saying that it will perfectly work out if you go the other direction, but obviously some change has to be had. So with that said, thanks to the callers, thanks Ashraf for joining me once again.
No problem, Sean.
This is, I think, one of the things that people need to understand. There's no right answer that we can just point to and say, do that, and everything will be solved, right? Not everything I said is going to perfectly work out. Not everything Ashraf said is going to perfectly work out. The truth is somewhere in the middle. But then on top of that, it also then depends on how we ourselves apply it amongst ourselves. So with that said, have a good weekend. Stay safe. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Don't miss 10 questions at 10 a.m. on WESN with Andy Johnson. It's coming up next. And we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
WESN